So last week, we talked about accepting others on their path. And it seemed to me like the next step in this journey for us needed to be about managing expectations and resentments. So I want to begin with one of my favorite messages from Brene Brown. She has a lot to say on this topic, but this is ideally, for me, the true explanation of expectations. She says, when we develop expectations, we paint a picture in our head of how things are going to be and how they're going to look. Sometimes we go so far as to imagine how we're going to feel, how it will taste, how it will smell. That picture we paint in our minds holds great value for us. In fact, we set expectations based not only on how we fit into the picture, but also on what those around us will be doing in that picture. This means that our expectations are often set on outcomes totally beyond our control. The movie in our mind is wonderful, but no one else knows their parts or their lines or what it means to us. I want you to really think about that. How many things you have expected in your life based on your consciousness, your thoughts, your ideas for how everyone in your life should behave. And what they should do and what they shouldn't do, only you never handed them the script. Am I wrong? I think we all have a million stories about this. Yeah, but it's totally true. And in fact, David Hawkins believes that our expectations of others actually become a form of emotional blackmail. Because he says we manipulate emotional responses from other people just by what we say and do and how we behave. We even try manipulating ourselves, and we all know we do that. And it's a complete setup for our failure every single time. From everything I've researched, the biggest disappointment related to our expectations is that they are not real. They're based on our thoughts, not on fact. We can never validate most of the expectations we have. So if we can't validate it, and it's based on our thought, exactly why do we continue to have those expectations? I thought this was a great example. I tried to come up with something that reminded me the most of what I've done in the past. So imagine you're getting invited to a wedding or a reunion or some big event, and it's the ultimate motivator every time. Lose weight, change your hair, look good, right? How many people have lived my life? Come on, every event. But here's the kicker. What evidence do we have, first of all, that this time we'll be able to do it? If all those things were doable, why haven't we been doing them? So we have no evidence that we can actually do it. And second of all, is what evidence supports our theory that changing our hair, changing our weight, looking different is going to make us have a better time at this event with those people? Because the real thing is that we're trying to fix the outside. You know, we've talked about imposter syndrome, and we'll have to revisit that at some point this year. But we're just creating the imposter on the outside so that we can feel strong enough to go up and face the people from the inside. But there's no guarantee. And I started thinking about all the health surveys I've ever had to fill out. And the older I get, the more they ask stupid questions of me. You know, I throw fits every year at the annual doctor appointment about how I feel I'm treated in these scenarios. And one of the ultimate questions they ask every time is, when was the last time you were happy with your image? And my answer is never, every single time. Because I don't ever remember a time in my life I thought I shouldn't improve upon something. Whether that was, look, how I felt inside, some organ, I don't know. I mean, you name it, there's always a story in it. But if I write that down, I'm going to be counseled, and I'm going to be set. I'm going to be taken to the back room where they talk to me about how long has this been going on. So I never say anything because I already know what's coming. I'm probably being told on right now online. But here's the thing. I think that we need to take the same approach that we need to take with ourselves. We need to take the same approach with other people. We need to validate that there is mutual agreement between us before we run down the expectation lane. Brene Brown says that without verbalizing expectations about expectations, that we start to make up stories about how things are going to be. And unspoken expectations and our false stories will never be fulfilled. That's the reality. Dr. Steve Miraboli tells us that expectations feed frustration. It's an unhealthy attachment, he says, to people, things, and outcomes that we wish we could control, but we don't. Our expectations combined with the frustration we experience creates resentment. And here's what he tells us. He says, unrecognized anger and resentment re-emerge in our life as depression and as anger directed against ourselves. Symptoms like migraines, arthritis, hypertension are often associated with chronic and suppressed anger. He shares an example of a study in which blood pressure measurements of people in the group participating were taken before and after they received instructions about how to let go of negative emotions. And he said every single one of those people with hypertension showed drops in both the upper and lower numbers in your blood pressure, the systolic and the diastolic. Now, forgiveness is part of this equation because expectations and resentments often require forgiveness. And if you look up anything about forgiveness, it says that it is one of the biggest things that keeps our resentments alive. And our inability to move past those things will only make us unhealthy people. So my questions for you today, I've already answered them, so it's your turn. Are we able to forgive ourselves for having unrealistic expectations of ourselves? Think about that. Could we find it in our hearts to forgive ourselves for things we have expected forever that have never come to fruition? And instead of constantly shaming ourselves because we didn't lose the weight or because of how we behaved or who we treated whatever way, can we just forgive ourselves, learn from it, and leave it behind? I hope you're right. And the second question, which I think is the bigger one, can we forgive others for how their behaviors hurt us without expecting them to then be perfect afterwards? Because, see, we're really good about forgiving people, but then we've got them. They got to live up to it. If you've ever been in a relationship, you already know how this works. Yes, I accept your apology, but I'm watching. Am I right? Do we do that?
Never.
Yeah, never.
You do not me.
Yeah, yeah. There are health benefits associated with forgiveness as well. The Stanford University Forgiveness Project did a study involving the parents of children that were killed back in the Protestant Catholic violence in Ireland. As they were taught to let go of their anger and their resentments and any emotional bitterness toward who they considered the enemy, the people that killed their children, their cardiac, their physical stamina scores improved, and their hearts began to heal. It's also important to mention that maintaining an open heart is how we eventually get back to experiencing happiness. You know, having a closed heart is not going to bring us any kind of happiness or relief. So if you're a mad person all the time, get over it. It's not helping you. Never mind about the people you're mad at. They probably are living their lives as though it didn't matter anyway. But all that anger and frustration manifests in our bodies. I know this to be true, and it took me 13 operations to get that right. So I'm telling you from experience, those burdens have to be released. You think I don't stand up straight now? You should have seen me then. They physically manifest, and they break our backs. I also think it's important to talk about this message I found about deep resilience. It was written by a woman I don't know, Melly O'Brien. But she said that each of us has had experiences where somebody says or does something that we're hurt by. But we are the ones who keep fanning the flames and mulling it over and over and over. And the resentment grows, and so does the anger. And truthfully, we're the ones who suffer. We're the ones who become ill. We're the ones who have the depression. We're the ones who have the pain and the sorrow. Forgiveness is one of the 4 steps she recommends in releasing resentment and finding peace and strength. I also want to connect the dots for us on expectations, resentments, an open heart, and happiness. Sometimes we get so attached to what we believe needs to happen or how it will happen that if anything other than what we have decided has to happen happens, we will never be happy. It's got to go exactly as planned. And when I wrote this, I was thinking back to our son's wedding. When Jay and Emily got married, I will never forget how incredible they were in handling the situation. Imagine you're spending a fortune on having an outdoor wedding in a winery, in a beautiful garden, down at the hill. And the worst storm in the history of that area happens on your wedding day. And floods bridges and ruins the land. And the wedding gets moved indoors. Neither of them let that experience rob them of their happiness. I performed their wedding. I was more worried about them than they were. And they did an amazing job of remembering what the wedding was for. It was about their happiness, about them sharing their love. It wasn't about the garden. And it wasn't just about the pictures in the garden. Life events are going to continue to occur, and some are going to be worse than others. But nothing that happens to us can control our happiness. It all comes from whether or not we choose how impactful any experience is going to be. We decide how bad it was. We decide how angry to be. We decide how disappointing it is. We put all those labels on and we suffer from it. That's the reality. Happiness is a choice. It isn't dependent upon conditions. And happiness becomes totally unlikely when you're carrying around resentments, because then you're always talking about what you didn't do, what you can't do, what you'll never be able to do, and not about what you are doing. Last, I want to raise this importance of understanding that we have to stop what has become a societal practice of injustice collecting. Our society has become injustice collectors. David Hawkins explains what this experience has been like. He says media reports are full of chronic resentments, injustice collecting in our international relations, where we're always making the other nation wrong. He says we're unconsciously programmed to believe it's normal way of existence to hold on to those injustices. Why it wasn't fair what happened to me. And he said, and it's become terribly destructive. Anger prevents our freedom, and there are few payoffs in being righteously indignant, such as telling people off and then bragging about it on Facebook or some level of social media. Because we want to prove ourselves right, we take all kinds of risks to put ourselves out there and hurt other people and think that we should be proud. Letting go of our expectations and resentments, including our anger, allows us to be free and experience life with ease. Gratitude, growth, healing, our spiritual purpose on this earth. Charles Fillmore said, every experienced metaphysical healer knows that permanent healing is never accomplished until the mental cause of the disease is removed. Let's review today's lessons. Managing expectations and resentments with ease is possible when we first set realistic expectations, those that have been validated. Number 2, when we practice forgiveness, not just for ourselves, but for others. Number 3, when we decide to be happy without conditions. And number 4, when we maintain an open heart, our path to enlightenment. Our affirmation I wrote was pretty simple, right off the title. I am managing expectations and resentments with ease. Let's say that together. I am managing expectations and resentments with ease. And our quote is from Brené Brown, expectations are resentments waiting to happen. Let's take that in. So we pause for a moment to reflect upon the gift of choice, to choose whether or not we hold people emotionally hostage by our expectations, whether we continue to browbeat ourselves and others based on what we want for them to do. And we recognize the choice of calling something a sacrifice for the good of someone else or a loving gift from our heart. And so with an open heart, an open mind, a willingness to grow ourselves, we say, thank you, God. Amen.